You're live. Okay. Sorry. Do I leave the calendars or move them? I don't know. Are they distracting or not? Continuity error from one video to the next if you actually watch them in order. I have started compiling a list. I'm not sure where I put it right now of movies from back when I did the It's Only Just a Movie video, I don't know, 2 months ago maybe. And I don't know where it is, but it doesn't really matter because I wasn't necessarily going to just, as I said in the description, read off a list of movies that, now are considered bad or in bad taste, or it's not even necessarily badly made, but just, rub everybody wrong in the current, philosophical, zeitgeist or whatever. I had been watching a couple of videos, one a little more along the lines of what this channel usually is or supposed to be about screenwriting, and one about more of that topic. And so I'm veering, kind of straddling a line, right? Between what is writing advice and what is, why a movie was popular and maybe is no longer popular, or why people watch it now and want to say, oh, this is cringe or that. So part of that is very easy to identify. Does a movie have a certain point of view or whatever, that you may or may not, agree with or engage with? Like, if we want to just generalize, are all Hallmark movies about single women finding husbands? In which case, if you're into that sort of thing, then it'll appeal to you more than if you're against that sort of thing. And of course, almost every writing book, one of the first principles they tell you is, get off your soapbox. If the studio likes your soapbox, they'll leave it in. If not, they'll tell you to take it out, right? However that works. But I think, so I think most writers start not necessarily with a soapbox, but with a premise. And so they want to convey something through these characters, or else they wouldn't be writing the thing in the first place. So again, they don't all have to be the same thing. Like, there's war movies that are considered jingoistic, and then there's war movies that are considered anti-war movies. So how yours comes out might have more to do with the director, or, certain performances or whatever. And sometimes it might just be a total soapbox, right? So how they age, again, kind of almost subjective, at that point. And so we can't, regulate all of that. Just like, people who confuse even the character with the author, right? You can have this totally horrible character, to make a point, or, I think it doesn't mean that you are that character, when you write in the thing, or even in the audience watching the thing. Again, I try to remove these discussions from the audience point of view, more to the writer point of view, because the end result, how they perceive it and all that, either you did your job or you didn't. But again, there might have been interference between the point you were trying to make and the point that got made, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah. I think, though, in the past, it's really easy to, hindsight is easier to scrutinize, again, from an audience point of view. So how well the movie holds up will be how well it holds up, I guess. Obviously some movies do well at the box office, and then later people are like, why did anybody like that? Other movies didn't do well at the box office, and then they get a cult following or something. So again, there's no real way to unpack that when you're just sitting down to write a script entirely. Maybe you have a little more insight than somebody else. Maybe you don't. Will you still be able to achieve a script? Well, that's the thing with the movie, right? When I was in the previous video, the point was, most of these things are just made up. Some, not even, somebody who was not, novelist or, whatever grade of a writer sat down and hacked out this chunky thing scene by scene. And not all movies, but many movies or most movies follow a pretty standard. Again, this is not rocket science. It's part one, part two, part three, the middle, the end, somewhere around here, something has to happen that, makes the character have to do this, right? Does the character grow, or not? My starting point in terms of that, if I was going to impart one nugget, that isn't necessarily, on theme here, it's just, what is the character doing with the circumstances they're given, right? What's the setting is usually the first, what's the setting, what's their circumstances, because you can have somebody who's very poor, who has no resources, and how do they overcome that and achieve their goals? Yay. And that's almost every movie, right? Then there's other movies where the person is the ruler and they have tons of resources, but they manage it very badly, like Braveheart or Star Wars, right? And you have the two conflicting, the one, Luke with no resources and the Emperor with all the resources, or Vader, or whoever you want to slot in there, right? And where somewhere along the line they're going to intersect and we have a conflict. Otherwise, we don't really have a story, which is why it's, there's that scene in Star Wars where Luke sees Obi-Wan die, or Ben at the time, and that could be a conflict between him and Vader, but then he, run, Luke, run. Okay, so he runs, and later he doesn't even really face Vader. Vader's just going to blow him out of the sky and Deus Ex Machina, right? So a lot of critics, I think, didn't really like Star Wars for blatant reasons, but it didn't matter. Again, the movie made money, and then you see it again as an adult, and it's cringy in a lot of places for different reasons other than that, because the whole bit with Han Solo bailing him out never actually fails to satisfy. And Luke goes on to face Vader later. Fine, we have sequels now. We didn't, it wasn't maybe made to have sequels, but why Star Wars didn't age well in some ways, and still age just fine in others in terms of the overall character arcs and all that. Blah blah blah. Okay. So like I said, I'm not just going to do synopses of movies that you've seen or even ones that you haven't, but yeah, so the point with that was the circumstances. And so, but again, if you are only interested in, space wizards, Gandhi will be boring to you, right? And maybe later you'll see, and then later you'll see Gandhi and think, oh wait, that is actually in some ways, maybe technically a better film than Star Wars for, the subject matter or whatever, even though they kind of have a similar underlying theme or whatever, good versus evil or something. Yada, yada, yada. But of course, one's a biopic and, 3 hours long, and the other one started out as 2 hours long and then turned into 86 hours of sequels and prequels, whatever. We're still not done telling the Star Wars story, right? But the other thing, before I just lost my train of thought making my joke. Shoot. But it'll come. If I just babble long enough, I'll remember the other point. So the circumstances, the premise, the style of movie. Oh yes, I remember now. If you're in a good mood, you see a comedy movie and it suits you and you have a good time. If you're in a bad mood, you're sad or something, you try and watch the comedy and it just annoys you. But the other side of that coin, though, is if you're in a good mood and you watch a downer movie, you may or may not enjoy it. But if you're in a bad mood and you watch the downer movie, it usually actually can make you feel worse. So, it's kind of hard to find your comfort level in there, but this is necessarily to do with aging well. But I have seen some movies where I remember enjoying them when I was younger because they were, kind of quirky or whatever. Not so much necessarily funny, but again, made up stuff. So then when you see it when you're older, you're like, why is this going on? Is this made for people who are, in an altered conscious, and what conscious would that be where they would actually enjoy the way it's playing out? I don't know. Unless it has like a good soundtrack and you're just kind of ignoring it in the background and listening to the songs, or which I'm not going to name names, but there's one film that may qualify at least for that. But again, that's not necessarily that the movie aged badly. I think that the movie was just the movie that it was, and why I resonated with it at one time was not why I resonated with it at another time. And other people have discussed this more. And so, like I said, I didn't really want to go into that angle of it from an audience perspective because it's not really helpful here. But from a writer's perspective, again, something to keep in mind, but again, might be out of our control. Now, that was one of those movies where it was a writer-director, so it didn't have to, I think, if memory serves, so it didn't have to go through as much, committee. And it was the vision, intended, and the vision filmed were kind of the same thing. And so it was definitely deliberately made to have this effect. And, who was going to enjoy it? They didn't care. They made it, for themselves, I guess, in a sense. Typically, you won't be able to do that. Again, along with getting off the high horse is getting off the soapbox, rather. Just kind of putting that preconceived notion out of your mind that you're automatically always going to get to, write what you want, and the actors won't ad-lib any lines, and the director won't do weird montages of their belly buttons and lint and things. Who knows? So the whole, part of the thing I was thinking of was like, from the previous discussion of the film noir, the detective hard-boiled thing, but the detectives were always on the right side of the law. It's a little bit different than like the cowboy movie, where now we're getting the script where, it was the tribal perspective of this, type of thing, like, and we've had Flags of Our Fathers on one side and Letters from Iwo Jima on the other side, kind of telling both stories, that kind of thing a little bit more. Again, but that was like intentionally bookended that way, it wasn't like an accident. So it depends, if you're trying to write a response to some of those movies. Typically, obviously, the way that usually manifests is the spoof, right? We've already had a bunch of these horror movies, so let's make a funny version of the horror movie. And then they made a funny version making fun of the funny version, to the point where the movies were so ridiculous that they were almost already the funny version before the funny, that kind of thing. Obviously, most people don't want to make a career out of writing, just spoofy stuff, but there's already been 80s teen movie spoof. There's already been, mockumentaries. There's already been all that kind of thing. So it's not a totally new category, but certainly the most common, like I said. And I just was hoping to find that list in these bits of things, and I don't know where I put it, but I had gone through and, like I said, thought about a lot of movies that, even more maybe than comedies, but movies that you just so earnestly wanted to like, so eagerly wanted, and I would be hard pressed to say what, about them didn't age well. I think one of the things that's also changed, between, nowadays we have all these movies that are, basically kind of flops, and we can look to, who's teaching, I think, partly for that. Like, if they gave you these parameters or whatever, then of course, as soon as you got into the real world, you started implementing all of this, and right back up onto the soapbox, right? But you know, some of the movies that they expect to be successful and then they turned around and flopped recently. We all kind of look straight to, you know, some of those specific things. Oh, nope, because they did this, you know, a little easier to identify. They didn't have to age badly because they just weren't accepted, and they won't become cult classics, or they won't become those, you know, oh, how come we didn't realize what brilliant this was at the time? And now everybody celebrates it, like Citizen Kane, right? Another, you know, a great example, right? A movie that was kind of not super successful, but certainly gets taught in every single beginner film class ever. Because, oh, look at the brilliant techniques he employed, and da 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 da. But again, that's more from a director standpoint than a writer standpoint in the teaching. So again, I'm not going to dissect Citizen Kane for you. You have more than enough resources to do that. And like I said, same with circumstances and character arcs. That's kind of your journey as a writer. Like, I'm not going to just tell you, do it this, this, and this, and this, because you have to kind of figure that out on your own. You know, nobody's going to write the thing for you, even if you are a good writer, you know, or have a team, I guess. You still have to pull your weight in the team typically. Unless you're just the guy who comes up with wacky ideas and then your buddies go, oh, yeah, I like that. Can we use that? And you go, yeah, sure. You know, just buy me some Burger King or whatever, make sure I don't starve. And then they run off and hash the thing out. You know, however that works for you, fine. But most people have to sit down and write the thing themselves. And then when you get stuck, some people insist that getting stuck should never be an issue. It's like, no, for almost everybody, it's an issue. Almost all screenplays, I think, are collaborations. You know, at some point, get used to it. Somebody else is always going to chime in, or the studio is going to say, yeah, we kind of like what you did, but we got this other guy who knows how to make this work, and blah, blah, blah. If you're lucky, you get paid. And like I said, so, you know, and then the end result, again, there's been way too many movies made in the last century at this point to even begin to try and go through scene by scene of all that came before, to, you know. But yeah, I think this went on a bit, not too long, but long enough that, like I said, if there's any, you know, questions or comments or things that you think I have forgotten, leave them in the comments, and I'll, you know, try and give it some thought and insight. If I find that list, maybe I'll just type them up in the community menu later eventually. Like I said, I don't think there's enough hours in a day for me to do a long synopsis of, you know, a list of 30 movies or something, and why would that be necessary anyway? I had some, like I said, some stuff set aside, but most of these things I just go off the top of my head because it's easier than trying to read bullet points or whatever and keep my train of thought. I only lost it once this time, and it wasn't for that long. So, okay, I'll shut up now.